Well, we have Midweek Mediawatch, and this week Colin Peacock is at the helm. Colin, welcome to the program. The political honeymoon is over.
Indeed, yeah. It's plenty going on, isn't there? A new government taking over. No shortage of that stuff in the media. So, of course, we had the ceremonial opening of Parliament on Tuesday. Then on Wednesday, more pomp, ceremony and dignitaries, the speech from the throne with the Governor-General and the state opening of Parliament. So also the day before, on the Tuesday, the first day the House sat, telegenic or photogenic, I'm not sure if that's quite the right word, but the scenes with the protests in many centres. Of course, the media loves protests, good images, particularly when they're all around the country. And they were organised by Te Pāti Māori, so that gave it another kind of edge on the day of the first sitting there. And that included one protest in Wellington that then migrated down to Parliament. So, yeah, quite something on day one. You have protests organised by, one of the parliamentary parties, out on the forecourt. And then, of course, there was the stuff that went on inside, sort of symbolic protests during the ceremonials with Te Pāti Māori MPs pledging allegiance and, using some alternative oaths. Not just Te Pāti Māori, other parties did that as well. And then there was the outfits. They were much commented on as well in the media, particularly the Green Party MPs sporting their keffiyeh garments in solidarity with Palestinians, and that certainly seemed to trigger some people who, polarised by that conflict, thought that was a bit out of place. Very colourful, lots for the media to show and talk about. Newshub on Tuesday for their 6 p.m. news said, all this, right at the start of the bulletin, all this is a taste of the political theatre we can expect for the next 3 years, they said. And then in a report from their political editor, Jenna Lynch, Newshub had a kind of uninterrupted belt of senior politicians. This went on for about a minute, just all mashed up together, criticising each other's conduct. It was quite a listen.
Oh, it'd be awesome to see the oath change.
And so we saw our own oath, how we think an oath should be sworn in Aotearoa. It should reflect te tiriti o Waitangi, but there also should be a commitment to our mokopuna.
I actually think it's narcissism. It's all about them when everyone else can be respectful of the institution that they have worked hard to be elected to. But I did notice that after all the theatrics, they still swore allegiance and signed up to make sure they get paid.
He called it performative narcissism.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
No, he can go jump in the lake.
Seymour labelling Te Pāti Māori's protests theatrics.
If it was about us, I love living rent-free in his mind, and we'll continue to.
Preposterous that the Māori Party should think that they are the authentic voice for Māori New Zealanders. I remind everyone again, that party got less than 3% of the vote, and a lot of their party voters were not Māori. A lot of them were hippies.
Quite a collection there, Colin.
Yeah, I'm not sure no one could speak up for the hippies. They're not quite represented.
I wouldn't have thought that, but there you go. Not a lot of common ground, but is it presumptuous of Newshub to say it'll be like this for the next 3 years, for goodness sake?
Well, yeah, I thought so, actually, because, these are new combinations, obviously, a lot of grudges, a hard-fought election campaign, clear differences and a change of, of course it's going to be like that. And I was thinking back to 2008, after the election, John Key-led, national-led government comes in, and Pita Sharples and Tariana Turia, as she was at the time, later Dame, they were members of Parliament. They joined in with the national government. People had said after the foreshore and seabed upheavals just not long before that, similar claims were made that this was going to be a chaotic time and all of that, and it didn't happen like that. So maybe the novelty of this situation in Parliament will settle down as the political parties themselves settle down, business actually, as usual, resumes, and the media kind of get used to that. But it was also interesting to me, a sort of a separate point really, but some of the media's critics and, former journalists sort of now operating outside the media. Just one example, the former ZB announcer and I think former TVNZ journalist Chris Lynch, now running his own operation down in Christchurch. He was one of those accusing the media of supporting and even promoting those Te Pāti Māori-led protests on Tuesday, and I just think that's, there was clear interest in that. They were newsworthy. It was tied to the opening of Parliament and genuine political issues that were going to be debated and will be all week with the sitting of Parliament. So no problem with that. And I thought it was a bit silly to criticise them for actually promoting them. I mean, there was something that couldn't be ignored.
You can't, exactly. You can't not promote it in a sense or cover it.
Or acknowledge it, yeah.
There was one party, though, that wasn't represented in that audio, if I detect correctly from News Hub, the governing National Party. Leading the government, the media, are they trying to draw them into the arguments as well?
Well, I think, yes, that no National Party person in that little belt of audio, and maybe they're wary of that. They kind of leave the arguments to others now that they're trying to push this line of actually getting on with business and the real approach, the real challenges facing the country. But it was interesting. I mean, of all the comment on this and their sort of tactics in putting this government together, a lot of people have noted the Prime Minister appears to be giving a lot of leeway, particularly to Winston Peters and other leaders in terms of their comment, not trying to pull them into line and be disciplinarian and run the coalition that way. But of all the comment of this, just pick out one. So Audrey Young, the Herald's seasoned political correspondent, she said this week, headline was pretty blunt, the honeymoon is over. I don't know if they even had one. I think they went straight
pretty
into business.
One.
Yeah. But she wrote that when you add up, when she was looking at it from the point of view of those protests on Tuesday and the fact that there is now, significant resistance and irritation. I don't know what the best way to put it is, but among Māori people who have looked at what the government's planning and are at the very least nervous about it, and in some cases, willing to take to the streets in a whole range of places around the country on Tuesday. She said, when you add up the coalition government's plans, just quoting her here, there are a fair few policies that explain why the protesters feel targeted. So she went on to say, as well as ACT's move to try and get rid of the principles of the Treaty of Waitangi, it includes commitments to review the work of the Waitangi Tribunal, curb the use of Māori in the titles of Crown agencies, disestablish the Māori Health Agency, repeal the right of councils to establish Māori wards without referendum, repeal the law giving Ngāi Tahu 2 seats on Environment Canterbury, repeal Three Waters, which includes the regional co-governance committees, repeal replacement laws for the RMA, which included Māori representatives on regional planning committees, remove a treaty clause from the Oranga Tamariki legislation, and a pledge to overturn a recent Court of Appeal decision on the foreshore and seabed. And to all that, she could have added, actually, that's come out in the last 24 hours or so, Nicola Willis now saying they're examining how to stop the future payments to civil servants who have gained fluency in te reo. That's another thing. So you add all that together, and I mean, maybe people have been paying more attention than I have, would know about all that, but that is quite a list of Māori-specific policies. And Audrey went on to say Christopher Luxon now has a big challenge to address the sense of division his government policies are creating, all in the name of eliminating division. But when it's all laid out like that in just a few paragraphs, that is a lot, and that does help explain perhaps the scenes we saw on Tuesday.
And probably not the last we'll see them either. The government's mantra has always been that it's all about the cost of living for Kiwis. In your mind, is the media focusing on that as well as these other things?
Probably will, as the government itself moves on to this after the ceremonies are over and now the business of Parliament and government takes over. But as some pundits predicted, Finance Minister Nicola Willis has said, I've had a good look at the books now that I'm in the big chair, and she's horrified by it all, talking about economic vandalism taking place under the Labour government, borrowing heavily to prop up the economy. And Audrey Young again, referring to this, says this is going to become as tedious as Labour's mantra in 2018 about national so-called 9 long years of neglect. I'd forgotten about that, but that did go on for a long time. 9 long years, that were just 9 years. The years weren't any longer than anything else. But that looks to be a theme that we can expect to hear a lot of in our media.
Isn't that why we have the preview, the pre-election fiscal update, so no one gets that, I guess what you call like a Muldoon-style surprise when they take over the Treasury benches? Yeah,
well, that's what I thought. So I was looking for a good explainer of this. So I thought that was the whole point of it, the Public Finance Act and all of that, because of what happened in the 1980s. And perhaps the best one I found was the Conversation, the website run. It's an academic website, so the universities bankroll it, and their experts get to write comment pieces which get circulated and run by other media. I think TVNZ ran this one on their website, which is where I picked it up. Michael Ryan from the University of Waikato's Economics Department, he said, look, that pre-fu document was 164 pages long. A quarter of it was dedicated to the risks to the fiscal forecasts. So he was saying with such an extensive examination ahead of the election, you would expect the risk of a shock or surprise for an incoming government to be low. He said there are 4 possible explanations for Nicola Willis's apparent surprise. The Treasury might have missed some of the fiscal risks, but Michael Ryan thought that was unlikely given the pretty comprehensive statement of risks that was in that document. New risks might have developed since the pre-fu in September, but that's not very long ago. Also, she says the risks that Nicola Willis is referring to might have been mentioned in it, but the magnitude of them was not clear to them. And if this was case, if this is the case, more needs to be done for the pre-fus in the future. And finally he said, look, this could all be smoke and mirrors from the incoming government to walk back on election promises. That's a possible political interpretation there, but saying, they had to make concessions and coalition agreements with the other 2 parties, and that is what's actually tying their hands here. So his kind of verdict was the odd surprise might happen, but New Zealand's fiscal policy legislation is pretty good at promoting transparency, and if there is a surprise in the books, a genuine one, it shouldn't be of the magnitude that he says Jim Bolger experienced in 1990, and we should all be grateful for it.
Mm-hmm. Pretty strong words, though, isn't it? Economic vandalism.
By Nicola Willis, yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
Actually, other writers on this, Thomas Coughlin at the Herald and Bernard Hickey in his own daily bulletin, the Kaka, looked at this, and Bernard was really saying the test of this will be in that mini budget in December the 20th, I think it is, that Nicola Willis is going to announce it. So if she is going to make some possibly as yet unanticipated moves and cuts, then that will have to be justified, and we'll find out then where she really felt that there wasn't sufficient headway or sufficient notice of the financial position we were in.
And we seem to have been getting quite a few headlines overseas from the media there with the change of government here. Reported this week, the oil and gas ban reversal has been criticised at COP28. Climate talks, I think we're the fossil of the year.
Yeah, that's right, on day one. Yeah, that wasn't good.
And the rollback of the anti-smoking measures has been reported with surprise as well overseas.
Yeah, when I heard that, I thought, I wonder. But when recently the Conservatives in the UK had their party conference, and their Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, under huge pressure from his own party, he pulled out this policy saying we're going to copy New Zealand. We're going to have smoke-free generations in the future and denicotinize and push back the sale date. Just copy New Zealand's policy entirely. And people were there in the UK were highly suspicious, saying, well, this is a distraction from the Prime Minister who's under real pressure. But he was up there, earnestly talking about saving thousands of British lives from cancer. And I got contacted by the BBC, went on their Radio 2 program to explain, what is this? Is this really popular? Are the libertarians unhappy about this, and freedom of choice and all of that? And I think they are shocked having promoted this, particularly in the UK. It was just so recently that their PM adopted it. They were startled to find that it's been rolled back. I also found an article in Time magazine quoting Christopher Luxon as talking about the black market opportunities which would be untaxed. This rationale that he's now talking about. Also referencing it would be bad that he told RNZ that concentrating the distribution of cigarettes in one store in one small town, I think that's the Northland example, is going to be a massive magnet for crime. As we now know, he's had to walk that back, and that's not right at all. But the most startling, though, was this feature that actually predates all of this. This dates back to October, and it's an online feature for the US-based outlet NPR, National Public Radio, as was, but now very active online as well as radio stations around the US. And this one was all about, in fact, I've got it here, the headline is, it's one of the world's toughest anti-smoking laws. The Māori see a major flaw. And this is by a freelance journalist who's actually a medical specialist. And evidently he travelled to New Zealand. It's full of photographs. It's a very long piece and detailed. But in it he talks to the new Health Minister, Shane Reti. Back then he was in opposition, of course. And back then he was telling, what's his name, Sima Bajaj of NPR, we are concerned about high rates of tobacco addiction and the expanded black market. This will disproportionately impact Māori via more dangerous cigarettes and police crackdowns. He goes and talks to community advocates who are very concerned, and indeed Shane Reti again talks about, given New Zealand's incarceration rates, over half of prisoners are Māori, despite only representing 17% of the population. He expresses these worries again and again about an invigorated black market. So interestingly, people felt kind of ambushed by this when this policy was rolled out post-election. But actually in the month of the election, he'd been talking all about it with this American outlet. So really interesting. But I should also mention, though, the One New Zealand story on the day Parliament opened, it was on Tuesday actually, made the front page of the New York Times, the print edition and online. It was actually a story by New Zealand's Journalist of the Year at the Voyager Awards, Peter Mackenzie, all about Kiwis hatching and thriving in Makara Peak in Wellington. And this was a happy story about wildlife survival and, and coexistence with urban development, and very happy story. So New York Times readers might have emerged with a better impression of New Zealanders than readers of other outlets overseas.
Is that the famous Mackenzie family?
Peter,
is he from with his sister Thomason, the wonderful actress?
Yeah, that's right. So I think his mum is
Miranda.
Yeah,
yes,
that's
and
right.
Stuart, I think. Yeah, that's right. Very good. A lot of talent in that family and that DNA, right?
For sure.
After 7 years now, this is kind of sad because I watched the end of the program. One of those people that watches the end of programs out of some curiosity, but it was a nice show they did actually. The TV3 show The Project came to an end Friday evening with some quite emotional scenes.
Yeah,
nicely done.
They are emotional, those end of programs, aren't they? But 7 years was a good run. Yeah. Although, the thing is that you get to see where they assemble all the people, and then you realise, they had quite a crew out front, I think 4 hosts every night and guests and, so a lot of faces. But when you see all the writers and so on, people like Anna Samways and Jose Barbosa, and, you realise that this is actually a really big enterprise, and those daily shows are hungry beasts that require talent and writing and all that. So that makes it all the sadder. John Bridges, of course, too, like a really talented producer. Also, they had the executive there, the boss, Glenn Kine of Discovery Warners, who'd obviously made the difficult decision, but he was there, which is, quite something. And Sarah Bristow, the outgoing head of news, who was there as well. So, yeah, quite a poignant scene, I guess. But I'll give you a sense of how a bit of that ended when the show itself got underway, introduced that night by Jesse Mulligan.
At that point, we never imagined, did we, that it would last this long.
No.
And then, in other ways, it sort of felt like we would be doing this job forever. But here we are.
It's become our home, really. Tonight, we are going to remember some of the amazing moments and incredible people that we've had on this show. Jackie Brown, Mark Richardson, Paddy Gower and Kate Roger will be joining us. Yeah, hotties. We have got an audience full of our family and friends, and we have got a whole extra room full of mates and staff because we're so popular.
Indeed. Well, tonight, anyway, we're going to go out with a bang. Stick around for all the most wonderful and weird stuff that's happened over the years. And also, we've used up the last of the budget for some fireworks at the end of the show. Fireworks. You heard me.
Fireworks in the studio, well, that'll go over well.
Yeah, health and safety. But it was a bit of a gag because I think Jeremy Corbett lit up one solitary, sad sparkler and handed it to Jesse Mulligan.
Budget constraints, was it?
Yeah, and I think that was so. The spin-off's Duncan Grieve was in the studio for that final taping. Wrote quite a long piece about it. He saw that as kind of emblematic. We close on this little firework spluttering away. He wrote, catching glimpses of the faces who made the show in its dying light.
Yeah, all we could afford.
Indeed.
Well, when the closure was announced last month, the owners, Discovery Warners, made it sound like it was a money thing, that the show was just too expensive in tight times for the company. Is that the reality?
Yeah, it seems so. I mean, if you think of, that 7 p.m. thing used to be so huge. TVNZ, Prime, TV3, all back in the day with their biggest names, Paul Holmes and all of that, and John Campbell. Yeah, but now I think it's a struggle, and the audience attention and appetite for that same sort of thing isn't quite there, albeit that people do tune in for the 7 Sharp show on TVNZ and so on. But yeah, Duncan Grieve, again, writing in the spin-off, says it feels like this symbolises something bigger than just the project. The ratings are down for everything. Linear telly, once the most powerful force, and something the vast majority of us were watching, at least something on a linear channel, even if it wasn't news-based. Now we could be watching one of billions of pieces of niche content from anywhere on any device, etc. So he said the project was always comparatively expensive to make, and sometime this year 3 decided it could no longer afford to make it.
And getting the advertising revenue in, pretty challenging these days. Of course, one of the big things with the project was that Aussie format, wasn't it? And that was, I understand, quite expensive.
Yeah, I don't know quite what it cost to do that, but at first you thought, why would you buy a format just for like a news-based chat show? But Rove McManus, Aussie TV star, had sort of kicked it off. Look, at the time, I was a bit sceptical because it just seemed like when it started, it wasn't quite funny enough to be comedy, and not. It was a bit too once over lightly to be news, and
yes.
I was a bit harsh on it when I went back and listened to the old programs, because I was still doing Media Watch back then. Actually, I cut an example of it. This is from its first week on the air, I think, this is one I think illustrated the problem. It was a pretty sort of breezy treatment of the closure of the Cadbury factory in Dunedin.
What happens now to the annual Jaffa race? It's not like you can use Mars bars instead. And if production heads across the Tasman, you know what this means. Yet another thing the Aussies will say was theirs all along.
Are you still planning on boycotting Cadbury?
I think I kind of have to. I grew up with the smell of Cadbury's chocolate wafting in the air in Dunedin, and I want to stick by those guys and say no.
Well, can I just add this, that for you and for the other people thinking about a boycott, the head of the union, Etu, who represents the workers in Dunedin, has said today, please don't boycott them because you may be putting the workers' jobs at more risk. So find another way to show your protest.
And by workers, he means Oompa Loompas.
Okay.
Topical. Wonka's coming out soon.
About 7 years late. But yeah, I think that might have been Rove McManus with the joke at the end. But the problem I saw there was, this was a big issue in Dunedin, a major employer. Yes. It was huge. And trying to wedge in the gags, it was obviously part of the format that, the jokes, peppered in and the banter. And so I don't know if it really worked. I mean, there was nobody from Dunedin spoken to on that program. I think people there would have found it a bit galling that, people were trying to find ways of making light of it in a studio up in Auckland. But, having said that,
it got going. It overcame the problem.
Yeah, and I think
did news in a fun way.
Yeah, I think that's down to producer John Bridges, because all those episodes, 1,500 episodes, if people hadn't really reacted in the way that I thought they might, it wouldn't have gone for that long. And John was pretty good. He used to make documentaries of his own and programs, taking an issue with a kind of quirky look, but recognising not everyone was into his sense of humour and so on. It'd be interesting to talk to John a bit more about it. He appeared fleetingly in that final program, but no, I think, albeit maybe the Aussie format bit didn't help initially, but they've clearly turned it into something, and the presenters, bedded into it, and they found ways of certainly dealing with important issues and personal issues and things like that, and it ended up being a much better blend of stuff that did matter to people, whether it was serious or not so serious.
So I think programs like that are always missed. So I'm sure it will be, because, it had its presence in a prime time each night of the week. Yeah,
and Duncan Grieve, for the spin-off, he made another point, actually, which was, forget about your ratings and viewing habits. I'm kind of putting words in his mouth here, maybe, but it was almost like the death of creative ambition. And he said similar things when Today FM, the radio station, died, and a lot of people said, you tried to take on a big competitor in News Talk ZB, didn't work, you didn't have enough appeal, whatever. But they tried to do new things online, make podcasts, all that sort of stuff. And anyone engaged in that who finds that was all over within a year, once you go through that process, I think it's harder for people. They become less willing to commit to things that are a bit risky. Particularly local projects. I think that's hard. So he makes the point that what's next, maybe Shortland Street, which is a big established audience, part of the culture for those who are fans. Is that going to be next? We might have to rethink all of this. It's a process that won't stop as those big audiences for TV kind of decline.
Mind you, then you get the Broken Wood Mysteries, which that sells all over the world. It's not even probably made for New Zealand anymore because it's been so successful, everywhere else.
Yeah, and done without, I think, any New Zealand television network having to invest in it or public money, I think, yeah.
4 minutes and just a bit to 11, so we've just got time to have a chat about the numbers, running the numbers, the costs of broadcasting, making tough decisions. We've been talking about this earlier this evening. Sky TV ups its charges.
Yes, I heard you talking about that. So yeah, the cost of interesting one. So the costs going up about $4 or $5 for Sky Sports and also for this Neon channel. But the more interesting thing I think was it's the second price rise in a year for the sports, and people are noting, so Spark Sport goes down. And that content gets spread around Sky, or TVNZ acquired some of it, and then the price goes up twice. Interesting. So they don't think that's a coincidence, but I don't know how that market works. But the Neon channel, interesting, with its highbrow HBO stuff and the Game of Thrones spin-offs and all of that, going up to $20 a month or $200 a year. Seems a lot to me, but the big thing is putting ads now around the movies. I think people paying for a premium channel don't expect to see ads, and that is a tough one, possibly a risky move.
Yeah, well, I wonder if it is. And of course, you do have the choice, don't you, of going elsewhere.
Yeah, and people thought Netflix were talking about this. We might introduce a cheaper sub if you were prepared to tolerate ads. I don't think it hasn't happened yet. I don't think anywhere in the world. Might be wrong about that, but certainly hasn't happened in this market. And people were worried, like, if Netflix did that, it would have an effect all across the market because, a lot more people might go for a cheaper option, tolerate the ads. So, yeah, there's a lot of unintended consequences in these sorts of things.
And finally, the Herald has had a bit of backlash. Who'd have thought, trimming the space it gives to letters to the editor? Yeah,
and the backlash came from a former editor, Gavin Ellis. He writes a very good weekly commentary on the media. In his one on Tuesday, he said, I didn't notice this, I have to say, but from the 20th of November, the space given over to letters was cut in half by the Monday, Friday editions, and replaced half of that space taken up with a photo of the day and a banner for News Talk ZB's Kerry Woodham show, and he's saying that could have accommodated lots more letters. And in Gavin's words, there's something wildly illogical about this when media are striving to find ways to engage with their audience. The largest paper in the country devalues, Gavin's words, one of the few ways readers can engage with the print publication.
Why do you think the Herald has done this?
Well, Gavin says it's just money. Photographs are a cheap way of filling the space. And, there's a lot of work to do picking out those letters. How do you balance them up? What are the good ones? You've got to sub-edit them. And also now that they've got a digital first strategy, perhaps the letters on the page not quite such a priority anymore. So either the time and effort that goes into, marshalling those letters,
yes.
They are not prepared to put that effort in anymore. That's his interpretation.
And do you think it is people using other ways, like, for example, social media, having their say, being able to publish their thoughts?
Yeah, that's certainly true. There's all those options. But Gavin is saying, look, these are different. When you write a letter for publication, you've got to give an address for verification. Your name is definitely on it, and it goes down in the record, not just into the digital morass. And he's saying that's sobering prospect. So the printed letter has a permanence, and because of that, people do tend to write, this is my interpretation now, not Gavin's, like a small essay. They will marshal their thoughts in a way that they wouldn't with a blurt in a tweet or a social media post or something. But Gavin says, I pity future historians centuries from now trying to piece together 21st century society. The artefacts will be few and far between as the digital data degrades and is lost, and you don't have the record of the past that you might have had of the tattered remains, he says, from more than 3 centuries of letters to the editor.
He should have written a letter to the editor about it, really.
Well, he did, but he actually wrote about something else. He said, you've just marked 160 years of the Herald, and he says you didn't properly acknowledge the Wilson and Horton founding families of the Herald. You should have done that. He wrote to them about that instead.
Well, that is a bit of a gap, it has to be said. But
yeah,
anyway.
but they didn't publish his letter.